Shane Lahan in Shane. Constanto.
On our side.
Lola Patrick Demort, St. Patrick's Day.
Sinead got out, yeah.
Very exciting time for us all.
Well, I'll tell you what, I think back, Dahi, when I was a child, the most exciting part of the day for me was my Patrick's Day badge.
Yeah.
And when I think about it, no, we were so simple. It was a small little piece of green satin, we'll say, cut with a heart on it. And my father and mother would buy that. And my brothers and myself and my sister would be looking at them, but we weren't allowed to put them on for the day of Patrick's Day.
So you'd have them for a few days before
beforehand you'd be looking at it, and we were so proud when we put them on. We'd be like peacocks or chest out.
As well,
you'd have your best rig out on, your best clothes off to mass, and maybe for the parade afterwards. But we felt $1 million.
Yeah.
But what's interesting about those badges, they're a remnant of something that was very, very prominent at the century before. And they were what we call the St. Patrick's Cross. And the St. Patrick's Cross had a whole deep level of folklore to it in itself. There was a different cross for the boys and a different cross for the girls. The boys' cross, first and foremost, was something that was made. This is one I did earlier for you.
Yeah.
Okay, so what it was a series of circles. Now, long ago, present day, we'd have a compass, but long ago, they had no compass.
That looks very modern.
Yeah, it looks very modern. A white piece of paper, but this is the most interesting part. When they had to colour it in, you and I would go to the art shop today. They had no art shop long ago, so they had to make the pigments themselves.
How did they do that?
Okay, so one which was available was the blue, the stuff that you had for the laundry and the linen.
Okay.
That was easy enough. After that, the yellow came from the yolk of an egg. So you took out the yolk of an egg, that was your yellow. The green, believe it or not, was got for going out, taking a bit of grass and chewing it up in your mouth.
And spitting
it out and getting the green. And the red then, sure enough, was blood. Literally. You pricked your finger. So the creation of the boys' cross was a whole adventure in itself. And then the boys would always wear that in their cap or in their hat.
I can't believe the blood part. Sorry, Shane, I'm so shocked at the blood part.
But the girls then had a different one. This is one from the National Museum. And I got one of my students in Coláiste Stefan to make me a copy of it. Okay, Siobhan O'Sullivan in the art course there, so she very kindly did that. But what is interesting about this one is that this was made with ribbons, and there was always the red ribbon, and the red ribbon was the old cross. This was the old St. Patrick's Cross. So if you look at the Union Jack today, it still has St. Patrick's Cross on it, and that's where that came from. And of course, what happens is the girls would wear that then. They would wear it quite often on their shoulder, on their right shoulder, but it was considered really sort of effeminate if a young boy was wearing a girl's cross, and was considered totally unorthodox if a girl was to wear one of the boys' crosses.
So it's very, very...
So these were the St. Patrick's crosses, and they kind of fell out of use, if you like. They did come originally from way back, when we're talking about when the old symbols of like the leek and the shamrock and the rose and the thistle were used for all of that. But that was the period it came from. It survived in the folk tradition, and then it's kind of died.
It's important to say as well that St. Patrick, like say, we always claim him here as Irish Catholics, but say if you go up to the Protestants in the north of Ireland, they hail St. Patrick as well.
Absolutely. There's a massive tradition about Patrick, and that's maybe why he's become such a popular figure that was there. But we went off then with our badges all dressed up. We went off to the parade. And like when I think about the parade, I think about it in two ways. One of my jobs is to look at it from a cultural anthropological perspective and pull myself out of it. And we forget, of course, that the parade occurs at the equinox. It occurs in and around this time of the year, very importantly. It occurs at a time of what you might call Carnival. Carnival, of course, when during Lent, we're not allowed to eat meat, we're not allowed to do anything. But Paddy's Day was the one day you could break it out. And parades, like you think of the Carnival in Rio or in Louisiana and so on.
New Orleans.
The Patrick's Day parade, in a way, is a manifestation of that. And the procession and the parade, when you think about, let's say, a team after winning a trophy, or if you think about a religious Corpus Christi parade, you're not only you're the crowd who are looking at it, and the gang who are marching in it are really important in themselves. But the first parades, actually in Ireland, the first parade in Ireland was only in 1903. in Waterford.
My
So we had
goodness.
no parades whatsoever.
Where did they start?
So they started off in America essentially.
Like everything,
and
like
when-
Halloween and everything. It all comes back to it, doesn't it?
the earliest recorded parade, funny enough, is in Florida, in a town called San Agustin, and in 1601.
St. Patrick's Day parade.
St. Patrick's Day parade in 1601, first ever recorded.
But I
where-
suppose when you think of it, was it a whole immigrants thing trying to hold on to the home kind of
It
ways, or was
exact-
that's
you
probably what
have
it was?
Exactly. But the first one was amalgamated with the Carnival, the Spanish community
Okay.
that were there in Florida.
In 1601.
1601. Later, then the earliest ones, for, let's say, take the Boston and
New
the New
York,
York ones and so on. You think about Boston, they were all immigrants,
Oh, yeah.
and they were quite like the Irish had a very poor reputation.
Yeah.
And one effort was to put a bit of order into the Irish that were there. So the parade, in a way, was almost a manifestation of the mill workers, the Industrial Revolution, all of those. They organised it. The guilds had their own groups with their
Oh, yeah.
banners. It was putting a bit of smock
Yeah.
on what was generally a fairly
But
wild affair.
Shane was probably also saying, hang on a second here, we have an Irish background, but this is what we've achieved here in America.
Yeah, and then what's really interesting about it, it was taken over by trying to recruit people into the different wars. So the Anglo-American Wars of 1812, but particularly post-famine, the American Revolution 1861 to 65, huge amounts of the Irish immigrants were brought into both sides of the conflict. So the marching band, the uniforms,
That's
the
where that came
parade,
from.
all
Oh.
of that became a real aspiration for the poor. Like, this is, if you join this army,
Yeah.
this is what's going to happen. So the parades had a military element
Yeah.
into it. And I think what's interesting is that more now, the Patrick's Day festival, that we're moving away from the concept of the parade. But I have to say this, when we were young, right, we were so excited about Patrick's Day. The reality is, when we hit the parade, we were kind of faced with, our imaginations were gone wild.
Yeah.
But it was usually, like in my day, a cement lorry.
I know.
The FCA were there for them, and then you might have had a bunch of dancing girls on a platform.
Yeah. And a
And
moving truck, in
a
all
moving
fairness, which is a very tough thing to
Oh,
do.
a
Yeah,
truck
we've all
and-
done that.
And some fella in a vintage car, you know, and then I
Play
suppose
recorders,
you-
off key.
you might have the Legion of Mary and CND and, you know, whatever it was. And
Yeah.
what I used to love is that there'd be there'd be a log jam, and there'd be people marching on the spot for ages. And I think I was more embarrassed than they were, you know, because you'd be
Yeah,
trying
yeah.
to pretend that everything was
Oh,
great.
that is so-
Yeah.
I actually forgot the part that everyone would have to stand in
And there
the
was always a
same
stop. No matter how much you rehearse, there was
Yeah.
always a
There,
stop.
there was a stop.
But
Oh,
Shane,
my
if you go back to Dingle, then I think they still go around town on St. Patrick's morning with the Ranboys.
That's right, you're right.
Yeah.
So
Why
you-
the ran?
Well, you're gone back into the same traditions like the Ran and so on, that all of these older processions and parades all belong to these times in the year, either Stephen's Day or midwinter. This is the equinox, as I say. So you're absolutely bang on. The ritualistic aspect of it is there in terms of parade.
Yeah, and I think they still go out early in the morning because
Exactly.
back in the day they weren't allowed to do it during daylight.
That's
wasn't
it, and at dawn and so on. And
Yeah.
Aoife Granville, my good pal below, she'd be telling me about the Shride Owen,
Yeah,
and they
Shride
out
Owen.
early in the morning.
The
Shane,
Green
did
Gold
they-
no be up against her, no.
Shane, did they put pig sites and things in windows? Some of the traders. What was that
Listen,
about?
remember I said it was Carnival,
Yeah.
and so normally during Lent, Paddy's Day is always during Lent, but you were allowed to break out with whiskey and drowning the
Was
shamrock.
that always the case?
Always the case, always the case. And for all the accounts I've had is the Irish will break out. They used to put the pigs' heads up. This is one of my father's illustrations, I have to say. But in the cities,
Wow.
particularly in Waterford, in Cork, in Limerick, where all these pig processing places were, they would dress up the windows in the pig's head, and they would put a pipe in their mouth and a shamrock up in their hat. The pipe in the mouth was, "We smoke our own bacon." That was the But everyone, like, you'd look forward to a window at Christmas in a town. You looked forward to the display because of all the parts of the pig. That was the kind of the prime cut at this for people who couldn't afford another piece
But
of
yeah.
meat.
Craig and Wicklow was a big thing years
Oh, it
ago.
still was up
Oh,
until a
listen,
few years
and,
ago,
and
yeah.
you could eat every part, of course, of the pig. So
Yeah.
people loved the tongue. They loved the ladder, which was the palate.
Yeah,
They
That's
loved-
supposed to be very sweet, I think.
Yeah,
isn't it?
people loved chawing on the ear. One of the favourite parts was a little muscle behind the eye, but most people went for the jowl, for the cheek, the
Yeah,
pig's
the
cheek,
yeah.
and they would eat that away. And if pits were left over, then they would slice that, and they might heat it up for the tea later on, you know, and they would caramelize all the fat on the edge of that. People relished the pig's head, and that was up to recent generations. That was the prime cut for Patrick's Day.
Nothing went to waste. It's
No,
amazing,
no.
isn't it?
And I suppose now we have bacon and cabbage, of course.
Yeah.
You had pig's head and cabbage, of course. There's very funny accounts of the pig's heads. Brendan Bean has a great account that one woman went in to buy a pig's head, and because they're pickled in a barrel, and lots of them are pushed in.
My
So
God,
one,
even the visual
Yeah.
of that alone. But anyway, go
but
on.
one fella's head, the butcher took out the head anyway, and the head had been pushed up against the side of the barrel. And she said, I couldn't be bringing that home, she said to my fella, because the head was all distorted. And she said he couldn't be looking at that on Patrick's Day. So people were more interested not in the way it looked, it had to look right as well. And I always think as well then, there still is a tradition of Ireland of people having potatoes and carrots and cabbage to have the tricolour, as it were, in their dinner. And that is always part of the Paddy's Day
Yeah.
celebration.
It'll be a bit different this year, I think. No,
That's right,
no
yeah.
parades and
No,
everything.
no
Shane.
parades. You're absolutely right, and I suppose we take for granted what
we
we
do.
have, and then we miss them. But I think everyone will be
Yeah,
intelligent.
we're gonna have it probably later on in the year, like we did
Oh,
in
we did,
2001 as
I
well.
think-
suppose, Shane, go back to the old traditions. People had a lot of celebrations in their own home, and maybe that's what we should go back
Maybe
to a
we
little bit
should.
and look to
and
that.
a bit of green jelly now or something like that
Bit of
after
green
the
jelly.
dinner.
Oh,
would
that'd be
keep-
nice,
Yeah,
wouldn't it?
there's a big
Wouldn't mind
birthday in
that.
our house. Young fella,
Of
he'll be
course you
6
do.
in
He's
St.
6 on
Patrick's
St.
Day. Yeah,
Patrick's
so
Day,
my
yeah.
goodness,
that'll be a
that's
different
great.
type of celebration.
That's
Yeah,
fantastic.
yeah,
Love it.
totally.
Well done.
Shane,
Shane,
go to
thanks so
Milan.
much.
Anna, ma.
Absolutely brilliant as always. Now, coming up, we're going to see what our beauty experts have done with our makeover guest, Siobhan Sheehy.
And we are delighted to have Alice Taylor back on our couch, a rock of sense and an Irish treasure as well, Maura. Can you imagine she had a good few St. Patrick's Days as well. We'll be chatting to her about that
Pleasure.
and more in Egg the Vogry.